Larry, today we're bringing viewers a special evening edition of the Citizens Grand Jury. Glad to see you recovered from COVID. How are you feeling today, Larry?
I feel relatively good. I mean, every now and then you get a relapse. You get a little dizzy or nauseous or whatever. It doesn't go away that quickly.
Wow.
I would tell a Woody Allen joke, but it wouldn't be appropriate at this point. But yeah, I feel a little better. So thank you for asking.
Good to hear that. We've got Joe
Yeah.
Biden in your favorite city here today, so I was listening to his speech earlier. But today we're going to talk about the witches of the D.C. federal court. What have you got lined up for the Citizens Grand Jury today, Larry?
I don't know if the audio is coming through to the grand jurors and others, but it's a little bit rough, Jason. I don't know. It's raspy. Are you picking that up
now?
Okay, great. Well, these are two of the worst judges probably in the United States today. And I want to lay it out. This is a continuation of the Citizens Grand Jury indictment of federal judges, particularly in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and its D.C. Circuit. This is the most politicized court in the United States. It's much worse than even the Northern District of California and the Ninth Circuit. It's much worse than even the 11th Circuit, which is very leftist as well, which doesn't read much of what you file there. But this has become so political. And these judges have not only committed a number of different acts even before January 6th that are reprehensible, particularly the one on the left, which is Colleen Color Catelli. I've been dealing with her now for decades. I write about her in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. And my newest book, which is coming out in a week, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America. It's the sequel to It Takes a Revolution. We're now in a counter-revolutionary mode because the left has waged a revolution and it's won. And we are now living in a dictatorship, a leftist dictatorship. That's a fact. And the other one is Tanya Chutkin, not to be confused with Tanya Tucker, who actually sings to a pretty nice tune in the country world. This woman is a radical black, white-hating judge on the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Look at her. She looks angry right there. Probably saw a white person. I don't know. But in any event, I want to start the process, and I want to use them as an example of why we now are pursuing indictments of federal judges, in particular at Washington, D.C., for violating their oath of office. We began that a few weeks ago. But this is something which is dear to my heart, or lack thereof, because these two judges have no heart. But without judges, without honest judges, and I believe that in principle, they're the most important public servants that we have, because they are designed to protect us from the tyranny of the other two branches of government and from ourselves. Yet they have become the tools, not just of the other two branches of government, but of special interests that got them on the bench through political campaign contributions and other forms of grease, whether it's large labor unions, large law firms, sports leagues, you name it. We do not have the best and the brightest, and worst, are on the bench are largely corrupt, compromised federal judges. And the American people saw that. And that was one of the primary reasons for January 6th. It wasn't just about whether there was a fraudulent election. It was about the fact that the American people had come to see government as totally dishonest and corrupt. And the straw that broke the camel's back, in my opinion, and the opinion of others, is the elections, because President Trump could not even get a hearing from his own Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett, notwithstanding the others. The only one I think that wanted to give him a hearing was Justice Clarence Thomas on a dispute between Texas and four other states. And that is a matter of original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. He should have at least have had a hearing. But these judges who are part of this Washington club, this Washington establishment, the establishments in state capitals, threw him under the bus and wouldn't even give him his day in court. And, it's interesting, and this is an Achilles heel of President Trump. He did many good things. I supported him. We were, in effect, his de facto law firm. But he lives in an alternative universe, too. I mean, he's still out there bragging about these judges. And it's not just them, it's the lower court judges that have thrown him under the bus as well. Every judge in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia has been persecuting the January 6th defendants as the tool of the establishments of both political parties that want to quell dissent, that do not want the American people to exercise their own powers, their own God-given rights under the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, including its Bill of Rights. We are to be beholden to the established government. We must obey. We must not question. We must do what they tell us. Now, in today's world, the people that want us to obey and do as we're being told are the evil Democrats who have literally been inhabited by the devil. But then if the Republicans take power, it'll be the same thing, the flip side. Now, maybe they're not radical socialists, they're not radical communists, they're not radical Marxists, they're not radical Muslims, they're not radical members of the Marxian Jewish left, or radical gays, lesbians, transgenders, or transsexuals, or radical blacks, or radical feminists, but they become a racketeering enterprise, the Republicans. So those of you who are listening to this, just take a look at all the emails you're getting every single day. Money, 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 give us money, give us money. And what did the Republicans do when they had all three branches of government? Little to nothing. They are the reason that we have a takeover by the left. And President Trump himself, and we thank him for what he did, he himself is a reason why we have Biden and Harris and the radical left takeover. He could not control himself, even with the fraud. In my opinion, if he had controlled himself a little bit and not offended so many people unnecessarily. Sometimes you have to offend people. I offend people, you know that, but you don't have to make an effort about it. And as a result, the American people reacted. They decided, even with the fraud, that they were going to give a number of votes to Biden and Harris because they couldn't stand them anymore. And that's a fact. So right now, what we have to do is to take back our own legal system. And we thank the president, President Trump. He's our real president for what he did. And we wish him well. He is, by his own prediction, going to be indicted by rabid, dishonest Democrat prosecutors in New York City. That's why he made a call for more protests just last week. Of course, the Democrats and the Republican establishment are condemning him for that. They're saying he's inciting violence again on January 6th. He's not inciting violence. He has a right to call for protests. And he is going to be undoubtedly indicted by the Democrats as we get closer to the 2024 presidential elections. It'll be in New York City. It will tie him down. Him and his family will spend their time just trying to keep themselves out of a New York prison. Can you imagine a jury trying Trump in New York City? I mean, it's unbelievable. It wouldn't be fair at all. But that's why we, the American people, have to do it for ourselves with citizens' grand juries. There's no political messiah. There's nobody out there other than ourselves and other than the Father and his Son. And even if you don't believe that the Son is the Messiah, as I do, you believe in the Father. And the Father right now is putting us to a test. They put us to a test that either we rise up and take control of our destiny, or we will go the other way of other ancient civilizations. So that's the reason for this. And in the old book of Isaiah, in the Old Testament, which Christians revere as well, particularly evangelicals. I consider myself to be a Jewish Christian. I'm very evangelical in my nature and the way I see things. It says that the tarnished city can only be restored or will be restored by the counselors and the judges. God looks to the counselors and the judges to assist him in restoring the tarnished city, which we are, put it mildly, to the faithful city. And that's why we need to take legal matters into our own peaceful and legal hands. And that's why we're doing these citizens' grand juries. And that's why we're holding these judges accountable, because I believe God wants us to hold them accountable, because he looks to them to mete out his justice, and they have not been doing that. And as far as they're concerned, as Jefferson said, as I write in my book, it takes a revolution, and it takes a counter-revolution, which you can get at freedomwatchusa.org. You can sign up for an advanced copy. Again, it'll be out next week, is that federal judges and Supreme Court justices, which Jefferson was against because they would be unelected, unaccountable to the people, thinking they were there for life. They're not really there for life. They serve for good behavior, but the government has treated them as if they're there for life. Only 8 have been impeached in 246 years or 247 years, going on 247, about 1 every 32 years. He predicted they would become despots and tyrants, causing us to shed the blood of patriots and tyrants yet again, about every 20 years or so, adding what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty. It's the natural manure of a corrupt government. I'm paraphrasing. He did not want to see violence. He didn't want to see anybody hurt. Neither do I, neither do you, Jason, neither do the grand jurors. But this is the importance of federal judges now that they're there. And we need to keep them honest. We need to hold them accountable. When they violate their oath of office, when they take that oath, they take an oath that they're to administer the law neutrally, not with regard to the persons in front of them. Now, let's just talk about these two, because we're seeking their indictments. We'll present that indictment next week, but we're just laying the foundation right now. Colleen Kohler Catelli. She is the worst judge I've ever encountered. She is #1 in the Judicial Hall of Shame in both of my books. I encountered her many, many years ago. And let me just give you a few examples. She is a Clinton appointee. Her husband defended Secret Service agents that were being subpoenaed during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, sought to cover up what was going on in the White House in that regard. I initially encountered her in a case for a client that I had by the name of Scott Tooley, who believed he was being surveilled, mass surveillance, by the deep state. She dismissed that case, claiming that only people that were communicating overseas would ultimately be surveilled. And she came up with that by reading articles in newspapers, okay? And what happened was Scott Tooley had gone to the airport after 9/11, and the ticket clerk, the stewardess that was checking people in, routinely asked him, "Do you have any suggestions for our chairman of Southwest Airlines?" He was then working for Congressman Chris Cox in the IT department. And he said, "Yes, I want you to check the cargo holds better of the airplanes." And the stewardess said to him, who was administering to giving the tickets out, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, because there could be a bomb in there." And the use of the word bomb put him on a terrorist watch list. And he was being surveilled by the deep state, as of Snowden revealed later, and after we got 2 preliminary injunctions to try to stop it. And it was in front of her, and she dismissed the case. I believe she cut a deal with George W. Bush, who was behind the mass surveillance, with Cheney. And because at the time she wanted to reassert the powers of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, she was the chief judge. And they threw the case out. It went up on appeal. It was overturned. It went back, and she got rid of it again. Now, later, there were whistleblowers that came forward over what was going on. This is pre-Snowden. And you can read about it in my 2 books. It Takes a Revolution, Takes a Counter-Revolution. And one of those whistleblowers was a woman named Diana Rourke, who had breast cancer. And she had worked for the government and had obtained inside information. So she logically came forward to Catelli and said, "I've got information about this. You're head of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. I want to come forward to you." Catelli turned her into the FBI callously, ruthlessly. And you see, Catelli is a leftist. She was opposed by every conservative group when she was nominated by Clinton to become a federal judge. So she believes in federal power. She doesn't think people should stand up to the government. She's become a yes man of the government. So she turns her into the FBI. She winds up getting threatened. Some of my other whistleblower clients that were in and around the same time period, the same thing. It worsened her breast cancer. And the poor woman, really was just terrorized. And there were others that came forward. One of them wound up getting indicted, for sharing information, inside information from the government as a whistleblower. So that was my first experience with her. A later experience I represented Diana work later for a short period of time, and some of these other whistleblowers. But this is who she is. And then I had another client who was a broadcaster at Voice of America who was allegedly sexually harassed. And I won't use the name. She had worked for a government agency. And rather than putting her back to work in a place that would have been safe, she deep sixed that and came up with rulings which were so factually wrong that it was 17 single-spaced pages of all the intentional errors she had made, callousness, because this woman, in my view, was a conservative. These are the things that she does. And of course, I've encountered her in my own lawsuit with regard to Judicial Watch. I won't get into that, and we're not seeking her indictment for that because that would be a conflict of interest. But it goes on and on and on. And in the latest incantation of Catelli's cruelty, and frankly, not adhering to her oath of office, she's sentenced, and we can put this up on the screen, Jason. It's the article, Judge Scolds NC Woman for Capitol Riot.
Yeah, I think
that was sent to you by my executive assistant.
I think we've got. I don't have the headline though.
It's in the Tribune, contentagency.com.
I'm sending it to him again.
We're sending it again.
Here we go.
Here it is. So, Jason, my eyes aren't too good. Can you read it? It's a relatively short article. It speaks for itself.
Absolutely. Charlotte, North Carolina, a year and a day after taking part in an unprecedented assault on the country's democracy, Virginia Spencer became the first North Carolina defendant sentenced in connection with the violent breach of the U.S. Capitol. Now, the Pilot Mountain mother of 5 will be the first to spend time in prison. A federal judge in Washington on Friday sentenced Spencer to 3 months in custody, 3 years probation, and $500 in restitution. In handing down the sentence recommended by prosecutors, U.S. District Judge Colleen Kohler-Catelli criticized decisions Jenny Spencer had made on January 6, 2021, as both a U.S. citizen and a mother. Kohler-Catelli credited Spencer for not being violent during her family's 30-minute stay inside the Capitol and subsequently had shown remorse. But the judge said Spencer's mere presence and given support to hundreds of protesters, spurred on by former President Donald Trump's baseless claims of a stolen election, who attacked police, smashed through windows and doors, and left parts of the Capitol in ruins. The grammar is not so great in this article.
Well, this is a leftist who's writing. It's an uneducated leftist. You can see the slant. Wait, you missed some. 5 people died, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That's the usual BS that they spew forth. None of them died, during the riot. Some of them had, whatever. They had problems with their derriere or something. I don't know. But in any event.
Well, there was someone, Larry, when we were there live, a nurse came to us and said that someone had had a heart attack, having nothing to do with the event. But back to this article.
Yeah.
One of the people who died had a heart attack. 5 people died. More than 140 officers were injured. During a particularly personal moment in the hearing, Kohler-Catelli also questioned Spencer's decision to bring her 14-year-old son to the violence, which the judge described as a complete lack of judgment on your part. It's very hard to comprehend, Kohler-Catelli said. This must have been a traumatic experience to witness. I sincerely hope he is all right. I think it's okay. A 90-minute session, which was held remotely due to the pandemic, was hampered throughout the day by technical problems. But at the end, participants across the phone lines heard someone openly weeping. To date, some 725 people have been arrested in connection with the violence, including at least 16 North Carolinians, after thousands of Trump supporters stormed. Did thousands storm the Capitol?
Yeah, well, this is a leftist who's writing it. Yeah, okay.
To stop the congressional certification of his election loss to Joe Biden and keep Trump in office. Spencer's husband, Chris, also is charged in the case. He's pleaded not guilty to a series of more serious charges and is scheduled to go to trial later this year. If convicted, he too faces a likely prison sentence, albeit one almost certainly longer than his wife's. Spencer was the first state resident to be arrested in the investigation. In the fall, she pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor charge of parading, demonstrating, and picketing in the Capitol building. Prosecutors dropped 3 other misdemeanor counts in return for her plea. Her defense attorney, Alan Orenberg of Potomac, Maryland, argued for probation and community service. In his sentencing memo to the judge, Orenberg said his client never expected violence or planned to participate in it. Whoop, we got an ad or something. Maybe buy a teddy bear, Larry.
Yeah.
She did not suit up for combat, Orenberg wrote. She did not hide her face. This is important, Larry, because so many of the people wearing masks, I do not believe, were Trump supporters. They were wearing COVID masks. That's Antifa. She was not armed, and she committed no violent actions. She did not destroy anything. Mrs. Spencer's only desire was to participate in a democratic process. Unfortunately, going to the Capitol was not part of that democratic process. In a somewhat rare move for a misdemeanor case tied to the riot, prosecutors argued that Spencer had earned prison time. When they say that she had earned prison time, do they mean that she deserves to go to prison, or she spent time in prison that would work against a future sentence?
No, that she deserves to go to prison. Yeah.
Ridiculous.
For her actions. Yeah.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Douglas Collier wrote in a court filing that while Spencer had not been violent, she and her husband had joined mobs inside the Capitol that were. Spencer later lied to the FBI about her involvement, saying that she and her family had been swept into the Capitol by the invading mob, when in fact photos showed them strolling toward the damaged entrance. Like the judge, Collier also cited Jenny Spencer's decision to bring her teenage son inside the Capitol, despite the violence all around them. She was not forced into the Capitol by a crowd. She voluntarily entered after proceeding past barricades, through tear gas and percussion grenades, and after witnessing at least one arrest, Collier wrote. Inside, she was part of 3 mobs, one in the Capitol crypt that overwhelmed police to gain further access to the building, one that invaded Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office suite, and one that demanded entry into the House chamber. She told the police officer she was doing this for him, too, and she did all of that with her minor child in tow. Accordingly, the nature and circumstances of this offense reflect a need for a lengthy period of incarceration. Wow. Catelli agreed. So this is the prosecutor's statement, saying Spencer had damaged the very democratic process she said she wanted to defend. There are lawful means available to change or challenge actions you disagree with, the judge said before handing down Spencer's sentence, but they don't include a violent insurrection. Got to get that in there. The written arguments in the case reflect a pitched battle to frame Virginia Spencer and her state of mind on January 6th. In a letter to the judge, Genesis Spencer described her mother as her hero and her best friend. She goes out of her way all the time to help people. She is so hardworking and strong, the daughter wrote. I have searched for inspiration to deal with all my troubles in life, and every time my steps always lead back to her. Orenberg, Spencer's attorney, described her as a veritable everywoman, one of the millions of Americans who, isolated by the pandemic, gored on the media's reporting of the Black Lives Matter movement and the raucous presidential campaign. After months of watching our major cities burn, many people became convinced that vocal displays of outrage in the form of protesting was the only way to make their voices heard, he wrote. Prosecutors paint a different portrait. When she arrived in Washington, D.C. for Trump's Stop the Steal rally, Jennifer Spencer wore an F gun control sweatshirt. That doesn't seem to make sense. On their trip to the Capitol, at Trump's urging, she and her family walked for a time with members of the right-wing extremist group Proud Boys before joining another group that clashed with a lone counter protester, forcing police to step in. Easy to talk S behind the cops, Chris Spencer said, with his son at hand, according to documents. Look who's protecting you behind the effing police, Jennifer Spencer taunted. The FBI says the Spencers entered the Capitol on the Senate side of the building about 6 minutes after the initial breach. In her own court filings, Spencer described the atmosphere as festive, but Catelli said the family quickly came upon a battle line of rioters and police. For the next 30 minutes, according the family had numerous opportunities to leave the Capitol. Something's missing.
I think that's enough. It's enough here. Yeah. I mean, this is written by it's a leftist slant, okay? And there's some key parts of this which, bear on Catelli. Notwithstanding, the woman sentenced for a misdemeanor for 3 months and 3 years probation. I mean, the woman, I hope she's well. She could be attacked in prison and even raped or killed. But, given that. But Catelli says there are other means that you can address these issues. Well, if you go in front of her, as just one example, you can't address anything, okay? And let me give you an example of this. With her ultra-leftist, frankly, hateful ideology of people who are conservative, people of faith, and also libertarians. And she has a long history with other conservatives as well. But I had a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that was transferred to her. Ironically, it went to a judge who's now being touted as the next Black female Supreme Court justice, someone by the name of Ketanji Brown Jackson. When I went in front of her, she's now on the D.C. Circuit and now is about ready to be elevated as an affirmative action judge to the Supreme Court. She barely knew what the Freedom of Information Act was. Anyway, for some reason, maybe to screw the Bundys, it got reassigned to Judge Catelli. By the way, she is a saint compared to Judge Catelli, even though she's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And that came out in an article, not that I wrote, but by somebody else in the last few days, that she's been reversed, based on a number of cases, more than anybody on the lower court by leftists on the D.C. Circuit, her own leftist soul sisters. But here's the thing. This case involved Cliven Bundy. I was seeking the documentation that the Justice Department had put together to prosecute Cliven Bundy and his sons. That information, those documents were already culled. They had to cull it for the prosecution. So I thought it'd be a relatively easy Freedom of Information Act request to respond to. And it wound up in front of Catelli. The first thing she said was, what does the government have to say about this? And our so-called government, its FBI through the Justice Department, came back and said, it'll take us 40 years, as much time as it took Moses to find the promised land to produce the documents. Yet they were already put together. And I told Catelli, I said, Your Honor, I've always tried to be respectful with her, even though I'm not terribly respectful outside of court because I'm so upset, but I'm respectful to her face. And she deserves not to have any respect. And I said, Your Honor, you will long since be dead. Cliven Bundy will be dead as well. And I'll be dead too. And this young Justice Department lawyer, she'll be near death in 40 years. So I'm asking you to expedite the production. She says, well, you didn't ask for that in your original FOIA request, so I'm denying it. So then I went back and I got case law that said that you could request expedition in front of the court. Unprecedented or, precedented case law, unequivocal, denied. So what does the FBI do? And it's still going on today. They produce dribbles and dribbles and dribbles. Most of them are press articles, not the internal documents involving the Bundys. Well, it just so happens that, we were able to be successful in getting the Bundys indictment dismissed, and it went up to the Ninth Circuit, which has much more integrity, I might add, than the D.C. Circuit. as bad as it is, and they affirmed the dismissal. But that tells you everything. To have a federal judge who's supposed to protect everyone, regardless of who they are, say that, okay, 40 years is fine. I have no problem with it. That is unbelievable. And we needed those documents for the defense. So that is Judge Colleen Kohler Catelli in a nutshell. You can read more about her in my book. It takes a revolution and it takes a counter-revolution. And this situation here with this North Carolina woman who simply was alleged to have committed a misdemeanor, who was not violent, who had a young daughter, 14 years old, who loved her, who believed in her, who wanted to be there with her. And then for her to say that she's subverting democracy when, in fact, it's judges like Catelli that are subverting democracy. She is the absolute worst judge, in my opinion, based on my own personal experience in the United States today. And I'm not even going to get into my own personal case. It's been in front of her for 16 years, now going on 17.
Wow.
What judge could administer a case for 17 years? And, when I took an appeal of that, and it's not part of this proceeding, and I went up to the D.C. Circuit, her buddies that she eats lunch with every day, because they're all in the same courthouse, said she did a commendable job. 16 years. So wow. This is who they are. They circle the wagons and they protect each other, you see?
But we've heard that they have this kind of like randomized process of assigning cases to judges, but there seem like so many examples where randomness might be unlikely. What do you say to that? Are they assigning certain judges to your cases or certain judges to certain people's cases?
Well, they're no more honest than the other branches of government. They just simply lie, and you can't ever find out. They won't tell you how it happened. Well, they may say, oh, it was randomly assigned, but you can't get any proof of that from them.
But do we know clerks who can speak to that, how that process works? Anybody who's been a clerk at a federal court?
Well, if you want to, they will resist a subpoena, and it'll go to a judge, and the judge will quash the subpoena. You ain't never going to get that truth out of them. Okay. Wow. And the judges and the clerks want to keep their jobs, but it is very mysterious. And the chief judge of this court, Burl Howe, I believe she's sent things in certain directions in cases I've been involved, not randomly, but by design. Now that gets to this other judge, this hateful, anti-white racist judge, Tanya Chutkin. Okay. And if you can call white people racist, you can call black people racist too. There are racists of all varieties, colors, shapes, and colors. Okay, this is someone who also gave the longest sentence to a Capitol Hill protester of 5 years. This is someone who actually went after a fellow Irish Catholic white judge by the name of Trevor McFadden, who has his own problems. Okay, he's also in my book. He's a Trump appointee. What's been going on in the D.C. court is not just Clinton and Obama and Biden appointees, but also Trump appointees, G.W. Bush appointees, H.W. Bush appointees. They all get together. They've all decided that they're going to put these protesters, mostly people, in prison because they're afraid for their own skin. They know the American people are onto them. They know the American people know that they don't stand in the stead for the American people anymore. And that includes the judge that I used to be so complimentary about, Judge Royce Lamberth, who gave the shaman, the so-called QAnon shaman, 41 months because he dressed like a freak. But he just so happened he walked into the Capitol escorted by Capitol Police. No violence, 41 months. And then he says to him, you must obey the established government. That's what George Washington said. Well, George Washington said that, but he took it out of context. George Washington was saying when the new republic was formed, there was a lot of anarchy. There were people who were disillusioned with the government because it didn't function too well at first. It was normal. It was a new government. It was a new nation. And George Washington was trying to keep everything together, a great leader, someone that we need, someone like that today, told the people, you must follow what we're saying right now. It's for your own good. There were many people that wanted to go back to the monarchy, like Hamilton, a limited monarchy. So it's different. Did our founding fathers obey the established government? Did George Washington obey the established government? The established government was King George III, who was far less worse than Biden and Harris and the leftist radicals that propped them up and put them in power. King George III was not a socialist. He was not a communist. He was not a radical Muslim. He was not a radical atheist. He was not a radical gay, lesbian, transgender, or transsexual. He was not a radical feminist. He was not a radical black. And most people in these groups just want to be left alone and, are decent people, even if I disagree with their philosophy. But there are radicals that want to destroy this country. King George III was a saint compared to who's in charge of this government today. Bring him back. Let's dig him up and put him back in power. He was Mother Teresa compared to these people. And he had federal judges too, just like we now have seen, that will rubber stamp what he wanted to do. His edicts, they were his yes men. They were his stooges. And that's what you've got on the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Every single one of them, every single one, notwithstanding the D.C. Circuit, because they fear for their own lives, because they know the American people are onto them. And I hope they're not hurt. I don't want them to be hurt, but we're going to hold them accountable in our citizens' grand juries, and we're going to seek to have them sentenced for violating their oath of office. And this judge, Tanya Chutkin, when a peaceful protester, and we're going to read some of it, came in front of her for sentencing, she makes reference to a remark that was made by Trevor McFadden, who had sentenced a peaceful protester himself earlier. But he asked the Justice Department, who was in his courtroom, McFadden being a Trump appointee, another brilliant Trump appointee, who's also in my book as one of the worst judges I've encountered. He's the one who dismissed the case of Laura Loomer and Freedom Watch on the big tech, and we had to go to the Supreme Court because he didn't have the courage to deal with it. She says to this peaceful protester in the Justice Department, contrary to what my colleague said, I'm paraphrasing, last week, because McFadden asked the Justice Department, okay, you're prosecuting the January 6th protesters. He has no problem with that. But why aren't you prosecuting Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and the radical leftists that destroyed this country, that maimed and assaulted and killed people? Why aren't you doing that? They had no response. So Chutkin then comes up in another sentencing and criticizes McFadden. He goes after him, her own fellow judge, who happens to be a white Catholic, and demeans him for just simply asking for equal justice. And I've had her. I have her in a case, again, it's a case that I brought where I believe she conspired with Catelli, and the way she handled that case is up on appeal right now. But she's a very, very dishonest judge and hateful, very hateful. So
Larry, if I may add, I think it's important that we mention that Judge Chutkin also presided over the United States versus Imran Awan, in which Imran Awan received one of the cushiest plea deals since Alan Dershowitz signed a letter for Jeffrey Epstein. He was let off for all the crimes the D.C. Capitol Police, the U.S. Capitol Police had charged him for in terms of hacking the IT network there at Congress, and he received no jail time whatsoever.
Yeah, well, if you're on the right side of the fence with these judges, you're great. If you're not, you get the full treatment like this young mother did, with Catelli. Heartless. There's this article by Hannah Rabinowitz, one of our leftist soul brothers, Jason, of CNN, Soul Sisters, a member of the Jewish left, which is so destructive of Jewry and of Israel, in my opinion. It's called Federal Judge Rejects Comparisons Between Capital Insurrection and Racial Justice and Arrest. It's short. If you could read that, I'm not going to ask you to read a lot. Yeah.
Well, it highlights that Olympic gold medalist was charged in the riots and shows him here. A federal judge rejected comparisons between the January 6th Capitol insurrection and civil unrest that at times accompanied racial equity protests during a sentencing for a Capitol rioter on Monday, just days after a judge in the same court had questioned the difference. Quoting Tanya Chutkin here, to compare the actions of people around the country protesting, mostly peacefully, for civil rights, to a violent mob seeking to overthrow the lawfully elected government is a false equivalency and downplays the very real danger that the crowd on January 6th posed to our democracy, D.C. District Court Judge Tanya Chutkin said. Chutkin added that the rioters soiled and defaced the halls of the Capitol and showed their contempt for the rule of law. She said the country is watching to see what the consequences are for something that has not ever happened in this country before. Her comments came during a sentencing hearing of Matthew Mazzocco of Texas, who pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of illegally demonstrating in the Capitol building, a typical plea deal that the Justice Department has offered to nonviolent rioters charged with a number of lower-level offenses. I just want to point out some Orwellian doublespeak to you, Larry. We've got mostly peaceful protesters burning down New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, but nonviolent rioters who are being charged with low-level offenses.
The difference is that the people in January 6th were predominantly white, and the people that burned down buildings for BLM were predominantly black. So to someone like Chutkin, there's only racism as applies to blacks. Of course, you can ask Whoopi Goldberg what she thinks about that too, a soul sister in that regard. But that's the way she sees things, okay? You can only racism applies to black people, doesn't apply to anybody else, okay? So we have to therefore extract our pound of flesh going forward. And here's what happens. So read this.
Yeah. On Friday, Judge Trevor McFadden, also of the D.C. District Court, said during another Capitol rioters sentencing that he believes the Justice Department should have been more even-handed in their prosecution of the Capitol rioters, suggesting that they've been treated more harshly than the rioters in last year's racial unrest. They've all been let out with no bail. These guys are rotting in jail for a year. The Justice Department,
now they're out doing smash and burn, rioting. Killing people, and you got the prosecutors that are put in by Soros that we've already indicted and are going to try between April 20th and 22nd as well. Now you have the prosecutor saying, that's fine, take a pass, go home. Go ahead, kill somebody. We don't care. No problem. Or rob them.
Okay, back to the article here. The Justice Department has argued the violent breach of the Capitol in which members of Congress and the Vice President had to be evacuated for their safety, halting the vote confirming the presidential election, was far worse than other riots in both the scale of the attack on the federal building and its disruption of the congressional session. Some of the riot defendants have argued in court that they shouldn't face felony-level charges for obstructing the congressional proceeding, but judges have not yet ruled on those arguments. Chutkin, who without directly commenting on the case McFadden handled, said that the riot was no mere protest and that defendants, including Mazzocco, were facing lenient treatment despite his deliberate, premeditated decision to come to the district and try to disrupt the peaceful transition of power. Mr. Mazzocco did not go to the United States Capitol out of any love for our country, Chutkin said. He went for one man, an orange man, Larry.
The white man.
The white man. With the makeup.
Oh, yeah, he paints himself orange, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so far, more than 90 Capitol riot defendants have pleaded guilty to federal charges. 12 have been sentenced. Mazzocco is the 6th Capitol riot defendant who's received jail time.
Yeah, and there's now many, many more, and all the judges are handing out jail time. They conspire. They go down to the lunchroom. They have their own private lunchroom. They go to dinner soirees and parties, and they decide what they're going to do. And they're doing it in unison. There are 4 Trump judges on that court that have sentenced people to prison time who were in the Capitol peacefully or around the Capitol peacefully. And again, let's go fast forward in reverse. July 14th, 1789, Paris, France, at the Bastille. What happened then? What happened when the King and Queen of France, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, told the French people, I could care less about you. Après moi le déluge, after me the flood. I don't really care what's going to happen. I'm going to cash in now, as our government is doing now with us. And that was violent. What happened on January 6th, by and large, was peaceful. And if it was violent, frankly, one could make an argument it would be justified at that point in time. Thomas Jefferson would have been the first in the Capitol on January 6th. And I don't advocate violence, but the people have seen what went on, and they had it. And when the justice system doesn't even give Trump, whether or not the charges of fraud are valid or not, Clearly, there were election irregularities. I believe there was also fraud. There always is fraud. No states in particular. They're corrupt. But when his own Supreme Court justices and lower court judges wouldn't even give him real evidentiary hearings, and when they then turn around and persecute the lawyers that represented him at the time, whether it's Rudy Giuliani or whether it's Sidney Powell or anybody, whatever you may think of these people now are in disbarment proceedings because they defended President Trump. I have my issues too with the DC bar. It's corrupt to the core, the disciplinary apparatus run by radical leftists, socialists, and communists, literally, and some of them are proud of it. So I got pictures of some disciplinary people sitting on hearing committees with pictures of Castro and thank you notes. So a guy named Michael Tiger. Yeah, check it out. So when the people see that, for Catelli to say, oh, there's other ways to deal with it. Yeah, come in front of her and to say you'll wait 40 years to get documents to defend yourself. Are you giving me give me a break? No way, Jose. So this is the natural result, as Jefferson said, of years building up of corruption in government. And I discuss that in my books. I go back in the deep state. Just a few examples. The assassination of Kennedy. We've never been told the truth about that. We know that. You go to the school book depository in Dallas, they say the alleged assassin of John F. Kennedy. They don't want to tell us the real story. The Gulf of Tonkin, when Lyndon Johnson created an incident to get into the Vietnam War in a major way, 500,000 troops, 55,000 people dead, hundreds of thousands maimed for no reason. And then go fast forward after that to what went on at Watergate. And, the irony is that Richard Nixon comes out as one of our best presidents by default in my lifetime, despite Watergate. And then get into Jimmy Carter and get into George W. Bush lying to us about Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. How many people have died because of that? They knew this was a pretext. They wanted the oil in Iraq. And then we didn't even get that. And then, of course, now we have Obama and we have the worst of all, Biden and Harris, who lie every single day to the American people. I got to tell you something. This is a gratuitous comment. I don't even believe we killed an ISIS leader. I really don't. Just like bin Laden. I think he was dead before that raid. He needed something right now to try to rejuvenate himself.
Get some obituary photo.
Yeah, I doubt it. So people don't believe the government anymore. They don't believe them. And it was Ronald Reagan that said, what are the scariest words in the English language? Hi, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you. It's much worse than that today. Much worse. Go to the Reagan Library and watch Reagan. I tear over when I see it. And, he was a real leader. He was sincere. He could communicate with the American people. He didn't turn people off. He had the ability to unite. He was not hated. And today we need to take back our legal system. That's number one. And number two, we need to declare independence again and get real leaders in here. And this country's on its back. And when you see judges like this, when you see judges like Catelli and Tanya Chutkin, one white, one black, it doesn't matter what their race is, but they're both evil. And there are many more out there like that. And I take special offense because I'm a lawyer. I believe in the justice system. I think judges are our most important public servants. But we don't have the best and the brightest on the bench. We have the worst. We have people that are bought and paid for by special interests that do their bidding, who are doing the bidding of the establishment. And they're trying to keep the people down. And they're rubber stamping the Gestapo tactics of the Biden-Harris Justice Department and FBI to quell all dissent, including but not limited to parents who have a problem with having their kids taught that homosexuality, transgenderism, transsexualism is fine as peachy keen, and critical race theory that white people are born at birth with a racist gene. And the judges are rubber stamping that stuff. So when you don't have protectors on the federal bench, what's your option? Jefferson said what the option was. It's called revolution. And that was not revolution on January 6th. That was a uprising. It was letting off steam. There were some people that did stuff that they shouldn't have done on both sides, whether it was right or left. But most of these people overwhelmingly were peaceful. Most of these people thought they were doing the right thing. Most of these people entered into their house, not their house, the people's house. And most of the people were escorted in by the Capitol Police. There were some that weren't, but just the Klayman shaman in and of himself, the video which you showed in one of our last sessions, Jason, he walked in with the Capitol Police by his side. But, he's unconventional. And I joked at Thanksgiving, a family member had a headdress that looked like the QAnon shaman. He's not QAnon, but I put it on and I took a selfie and I sent it to Judge Lambert because I don't have any cases with him who sentenced the QAnon shaman. I said, this Thanksgiving, Royce, I'm just happy that I don't have a case in front of you. Okay. And I sent him the picture of me in a headdress that looked like the QAnon shaman. And
he loved it.
I'm not sure he laughed, but
I laughed.
My once friend and someone who I admired a great deal has gone south. And that tells you everything. There's not one judge left in this country that will stand up for the American people under these circumstances. They won't do it. So I tell it like it is. I get retaliated against by judges, by bar associations, et cetera. But someone's got to tell the truth. And that's the root cause of our problems. If they're looking for someone to blame on January 6th, look in the mirror, Catelli and Chutkin and the others, particularly on that court. You're the reason for that, in large part. Congress is the reason for that. The deep state is the reason for that. The government is the reason for that. And you should thank God that all that happened was January 6th so far. And if you continue to do this, unabated, unaccounted for, and that's what we're trying to do in our citizens' grand juries, hold them accountable, take the steam off to show that they're equal to us under law of this country, under the rule of law. Self-unity, given judges they want without consequence. And when you sue them, and I have, other judges dismiss it. And when you file ethics complaints for judicial councils, it goes into the trash. They will not look at what their colleagues did. And then the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives protects them too, because they're part of the establishment. And they say also, by the grace of God, go I, just that they may ultimately have cases when they're found to have been corrupt in the few cases that are ever brought against congressmen to be there. And look at the corruption of the FBI. Like you just showed Hunter Biden. Look at the corruption. Going back, I think, to 2016 or 18, they've had his laptop. They know that he has laundered money to Joe Biden, his father. They look the other way. Even the Trump Justice Department looked the other way. Trump was not in charge of his Justice Department. He had no influence over them. And, when the people see that, when half the country sees that and sees a drug addict, alcoholic, corrupt lowlife scumbag like Hunter Biden laundering money to the Bidens, and it came out just in the last day or so in Peter Schweizer's new book, who writes great books and he does great research, but he doesn't want to stick his neck out either. He was asked on Fox News, do you think Biden's committed treason? Well, I don't really know. I don't know. I can't tell. I'll leave it to investigating committees. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to stick their neck out, but we know how corrupt the Biden family is. And why is it that we're going along with the Olympics in Beijing? Why is it that he's weak with Russia and Ukraine? He's been bought and paid for by Russia. We know that. And Peter did work in uncovering it, but he won't stick his neck out. No, I'm not sure if he committed treason. And it wasn't technically a direct payment to Biden. He says that. Yeah, it was a direct payment. It went through his son. That's how he got it. And the daughter, just an email came out just in the last few days, talking about how I'm tired of paying for dad, through the money laundered by my brother. So I'm paraphrasing. So when the people see that, when the people see this rank corruption, and at least half the country recognizes it in this context, there are people even, from other political spaces that recognize it in another context. And we don't have equal justice. And blacks of good faith and minorities of good faith, of good intentions recognize they haven't been treated fairly either, not to the extent that Black Lives Matter says or other groups say, or Whoopi Goldberg says, who took the name Goldberg because she thought it would ingratiate herself and get her jobs in Hollywood, because Hollywood's controlled by the Jewish left, ironically. Then she trashes Jews by saying that the Holocaust was not related to race, and then makes it worse on Colbert, saying that if two people are standing there and one's white and one's black, the Klansman's going to walk by the white person, the white Jew, but he's going to attack the black. Well, just so happens there are a lot of Jews that aren't white. In fact, most of them aren't white, frankly. Only the European Jew is white.
You know, Larry, you raise a good point. That was one of the worst things that Whoopi Goldberg said. And it was just factually incorrect, because there have been, in my life, people who have approached me, called me an effing Jew, and spit in my face. So somehow they were able to tell.
Well, you should be proud of it. You have the face of Israel. Okay.
It got spit in, and this dude was like
I got to
6.5
tell you,
feet tall.
I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish Christian. I can tell another Jew with almost 100% certainty. I mean, we have certain characteristics. So does every nationality.
But this is not just sniping at Whoopi Goldberg. This cuts to the heart of the question. What is race? Is it the color of the skin? Because you look at Colin Kaepernick, and he is much lighter in complexion than even some white people that I know, particularly during the summertime. So it's not just the color of the skin, but it is something.
My point is this, is that yes, there is racism, there's inequality in society, and we need to address it, but it's not just black people who are subjected to that. And it's exaggerated, it's used as a cudgel, it's used as a tool to destroy the country, to create race wars. And, you know, this Judge Chutkin obviously, you know, even went after her own fellow white judge on the bench who made an innocent remark. And this is where it's gone. And if the judges can't stand up for what's right, and they don't, generally speaking, then how can the rest of the country? And when the country sees that these judges are just the tool of special interests, and look at the Trump judges. I write about it in my book, the Trump judges. I use the French phrase, the more things change, the more they remain the same. They're not much different than the Obama, Clinton, or Biden judges. They have a different political philosophy, but they're equally as corrupt, generally speaking, because they're bought and paid for. They were put there by special interest groups and lobbyists to do their bidding. And I'll give you one example. There's another judge in my book, Randolph Moss and Judge Dabney Friedrich. Moss, appointed by Obama. Dabney Friedrich, appointed by Trump. Both from WilmerHale, a big law firm. Which just happens to be the law firm of Robert Mueller and the law firm of Jeannie Rhee, who defended the Clinton Foundation in a case I brought and also was on Mueller's witch hunt team. They got bookends of judges on the bench. Great for getting clients. Okay, we got two judges in our pocket on the bench, you know, and I've encountered both of them, and both of them are not honest. And I write about that in my book. So this is what you've got. By the very nature of how they get there, they can't be honest. Now, you know, intellectually honest. Look at Judge Lambert. That's in my book too. Look what he did with Arpaio, my client Arpaio. Arpaio is smeared by CNN as a convicted felon, smeared by Huffington Post, smeared by Rolling Stone, defamed. He is not a convicted felon. One of those publications even said he had been sent to prison. So the case gets assigned to Lambert. And I figured, okay, good. Maybe we'll at least be able to go to trial. Judge isn't going to have to make the decision. Let the judge make the decision. He dismisses the case. He says, oh, yes, Arpaio was damaged, but no defamation. And then I give him a case that another judge had ruled upon with another person other than Arpaio, who was made radioactive, you know, by these leftist media organizations. And that was a case where the judge allowed the case to go to a jury, and the same thing happened. He was called a felon when he was only convicted of a misdemeanor, which was the case with Arpaio. It was a minor violation, like a traffic fine. So this is the best on the bench that you know won't let this thing go forward. Can you imagine what I would have found in the files of CNN, Rolling Stone, and Huffington and Post? You know, So he bails out. And, it was disgraceful. And it really, that's what set me off to write my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. Because if this one judge who I admired so much had sold out, then what are the rest of them like? What are they like, and where are they coming from? And this is why, to me, the most important issue, as it was for Jefferson, are the federal judges and Supreme Court justices, unelected, unaccountable to the people, not our defenders, but in fact our enemies. They are our enemies in cases like this. And
I got one more question, Larry. First of all, I want to let everybody know that we're going to be having the trial in April. There are always people saying, oh, what's something going to happen? April is when something is going to happen, and something is happening right now. But the question I have for you, Larry, is how can we embark on a journey to engage in the legal process of getting one or both of these judges or other federal judges who are not upholding their oath? How can we go to Congress? I will go to Washington, D.C. I'll go sit outside Nadler's office. I'll sit outside Jim Jordan's office. I want to get this information in front of the committee that's in charge of doing this and make the government work for us.
Don't do anything. Don't waste your time, Jason. Don't waste your time. It's time for a new government. That's the Third Continental Congress. We need to throw these people out. Don't waste your time. It's all talk. Look at Fox News. They're all coming on with smiles, happy that the country's been destroyed in a year. Whether it's Tom Cotton, looks like a giraffe, okay? Like he's eating leaves, okay? He's got a neck that's a foot long, and he's sit there smiling with a sick smile. He's so happy. Or whether it's Lindsey Graham.
Have you seen this photo before? Are you aware of who this is in this photo with JFK?
There's some Jewish guy on the right. And
it's Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, Rupert's half Jewish, by the way. Did you know that?
Well, that's him.
Yeah, he's
What's
Jewish.
he doing with JFK in 1961?
I told you I could tell who's Jewish. I told you. I didn't know that was Rupert, though.
Well, I mean, isn't that strange? Rupert Murdoch, he's there in the Kennedy White House with this guy, I forget the other guy's name, Zell or something like that? Rupert Murdoch and Zell Rabin.
Yeah, another Jewish
guy. Who
guy.
He is.
Yeah, probably related to Yitzhak. I don't know.
But I think it's important to remember that in 1961, it was so difficult to get from Australia to Washington, D.C. Qantas had only begun flying from Australia to the United States 2 years prior due to the advent of the Boeing 707. He's there right away. Interesting, isn't it?
Well, it is, yeah. And I got to tell you something. In retrospect, I wish we had Kennedy today. And, he was a Democrat, but he I think for the short time that he served, he was a great president. And I was very proud when I was a kid. My mother sent him a letter to get a photograph for me. And when I got it, obviously he didn't sign it, but, it said John F. Kennedy, best wishes or whatever. But you look at that and I tear over almost as much as I did for Reagan, okay, because he was similar to Reagan in many ways. And he could communicate with people. And they made some mistakes. Yeah, they did. But, he was, I believe he was well-intentioned. We don't have people like that anymore. So anyway, I guess that'll end today's session. We'll pick it up next week. But it's not a question of Democrat or Republican. Both political parties are corrupt today. We don't have Ronald Reagan's. We don't have John Kennedy's. We don't. And, he wasn't perfect, obviously. We know that. So nobody is. George Washington wasn't perfect. Our founding fathers weren't perfect, but they were well-intentioned. They were learned people. They loved the notion of the new country they had created. The people today are in it for themselves. And you can see that with all the fundraising stuff you get on the internet, by email. It's a scam, most of it. And they're leading people to believe that if the Republican Party, as just one example, takes over again, things will be different. They will not be that much different. Maybe they'll block Biden, for 2 years. But he's already done the damage, and much of it is permanent. And that's why we now need to form a new government and move forward, as we discussed in our Third Continental Congress. I talk about that in my new book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, what we need to do. So I hope people will read it and we'll reconvene. We're not only doing citizens' grand juries, but Third Continental Congresses, other things. Now is not the time for sunshine patriots and summer soldiers, as Thomas Paine said. Now we have to take risks. We can't write books American Marxism and say, well, the only solution is protest and boycott. That's Mark Levin. You don't want to take risks. He's a multimillionaire. Why take a risk? We have to take risks. Our founding fathers were multimillionaires. And what the people did on January 6th, they took a little risk. Most of them were peaceful. But now they're being thrown in the slammer. And they're being told, and the American people are being told, you dare not criticize this government or the same thing will happen to you. That's the bottom line.
It's scary, Larry. I think that it's important that we remind our viewers that people can support the citizens' grand juries and find out more about the trial that we're going to have in April by going to freedomwatchusa.org. People can support the work that you and the team at Freedom Watch are doing by clicking on the Donate tab. And if people who make a tax-deductible contribution of $100 or more will receive both of the books, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, and It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America. So people can go to freedomwatchusa.org and make a tax-deductible donation of $100. You're going to get two great books, and you can help Larry and his team continue the fight to bring justice back. Larry, thanks for another great session.
Thanks, Jason. You do great work, too. You're a true patriot, and I appreciate your doing that. We do have dates. We're not disclosing location for security reasons yet, but it's April 20 to 22nd, 3 days, a great venue, a courtroom, a real courtroom. It'll be done in person. And a real judge, yeah.
Absolutely. That will be exciting for people to...
An honest judge. An honest judge.
An honest. Rarity for sure. And I want to remind people they can support Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Thanks for sticking with us on this late session of the Citizens Grand Jury.